My parents said the outside world was unsafe, so my siblings and I spent our entire lives trapped inside one house. But when I finally questioned the illness they claimed we had, I uncovered a hidden truth that destroyed everything I thought I knew about my family. My three siblings and I were told we had a rare immune disorder, something so dangerous that ordinary air, ordinary people, ordinary germs, and even one careless breath beyond our front door could kill us. Our parents never let us leave the house, not for school, not for parks, not for doctors, not for birthdays, not for anything. Mom homeschooled us at the kitchen table, and Dad worked from his home office. We lived inside the same walls year after year, watching other kids through the windows while they rode bikes, played in the street, ran across lawns, and disappeared into a world we were told we could never survive. Mom said one breath of unfiltered outside air could send us into anaphylactic shock. She told us our bodies were too fragile for the real world, and because we had grown up hearing it, we believed her. Every vent in the house had special filters. The front door had an airlock system that made our home feel more like a sealed medical facility than a house. When deliveries came, our parents handled them like they were hazardous materials. If someone knocked, Mom panicked. If we even stood too close to a door, Dad's face tightened. To us, that was normal. That was survival. Still, I had one memory that never fit. It was vague and blurry from when I was very young, but it never felt like a dream. I remembered a bright open space. I remembered children laughing. I remembered sunlight without glass between me and the sky. Most of all, I remembered smells. Sunscreen, cut grass, warm air, and something sweet I could never name. Whenever I asked Mom about it, she told me I must have dreamed it. She said kids with imaginations like mine often mixed up things they saw on television with real memories. But dreams did not usually have smells attached to them. Dreams did not stay in your chest for years, waiting quietly for you to grow old enough to question them. When I was 7, I tried to follow Dad outside when he left for work. I barely made it near the door before Mom grabbed me so hard her fingers left bruises on my arms. She locked me in my room for 3 days. Through the door she kept crying, "You could have died. You could have killed your siblings with the contamination." After that, I stopped trying. I learned that curiosity was dangerous. I learned that doors were not exits, they were warnings. Living inside felt like being underwater. The air was recycled, the walls were familiar, and time moved in circles. Every day was a copy of the day before, and for years, I told myself that was just how life had to be. Things changed when I turned 16. One afternoon, I found Mom's old laptop in the attic. I was not even looking for anything important at first. I was bored, restless, and desperate for something that belonged to a world bigger than the rooms I knew by heart. The laptop was dusty and slow, but it still turned on, and Mom had forgotten to wipe the search history. At first, I expected to find normal things, recipes, homeschool resources, maybe shopping pages. Instead, I found searches that made my stomach tighten. There were dozens of results about homeschooling laws, isolation, emotional regulation for children, and how to keep kids calm when confined indoors. There was nothing about immune disorders. Nothing about our supposed condition. Nothing about specialized doctors, emergency protocols, medications, air contamination, or any of the medical life or death rules we had lived under for as long as I could remember. That was the first crack. Once it appeared, I could not unsee it. I started asking small questions. I asked Mom what our condition was specifically called, not just the vague phrase, immune disorder. She said, without hesitation, combined variable environmental immunodeficiency. The name sounded official enough to scare a child, but when I searched it online, nothing came up. Not one real medical article, not one patient forum, not even one strange outdated website. Even the rarest diseases had some trace somewhere. Ours did not exist. That was when I found an online support group for people living with chronic illness. I made an account quietly, using a fake name, and started reading. At first, I only lurked. Then I began talking to someone named James. He actually had SCID, a real severe immune disorder. He knew what isolation meant, but he also knew what real medical care looked like. When I explained what my parents had told us, he asked simple questions that shattered things I had never thought to question. "You should at least have medical equipment," he wrote. "Oxygen tanks, emergency meds, something. Do you have any of that?" We had nothing. No emergency injections. No blood test records, no oxygen, no doctors visiting. No specialist names. Just walls, filters, locks, and fear. One night, after I told him about the fake disease name, he wrote, "Try opening your window. Just a crack. If you were really that sick, you would know immediately." I stared at his message for what felt like forever. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit on them for a minute. Then I walked to my bedroom window, unlocked it, and opened it 1 inch. The night air touched my face for the first time I could remember. It was cold. It smelled like rain, dirt, leaves, and something alive. I waited for my throat to close. I waited for my skin to burn. I waited for dizziness, swelling, panic, anything. Nothing happened. My lungs kept working. My heart was racing, but only because I was terrified. I was breathing outside air, and I was fine. The next night, James told me to open it more. I opened the window halfway and stuck my whole head out. Wind moved through my hair. I could hear things clearly for the first time, not muffled by glass and sealed walls. Dogs barking, cars passing somewhere in the distance, leaves shifting in the dark. The world sounded enormous. It was terrifying and beautiful at the same time. Still, nothing happened. No reaction, no symptoms, no death. My body was perfectly healthy. The truth settled into me slowly, like cold water. We were not sick. A few days later, when both our parents were in Dad's office on a work call, I gathered my siblings and told them what I had done. "We're not sick," I whispered. "I've been breathing outside air for weeks." My sister stared at me like I had just told her the ceiling was fake. "That's impossible," she said. So I told her to try it herself. We stood by the back door together, all four of us crowded close, my hand on the handle. "Just one breath," I said. When I opened the door, summer air spilled into the house. We all inhaled like we were doing something criminal. Then we waited. Nothing happened. My youngest brother started crying. He kept whispering, "Why would they lie?" I did not know the answer yet, but I knew where I needed to look. There was only one place on the property we were absolutely forbidden from going. Dad's shed in the backyard. He kept it padlocked and told us it stored chemicals that could compromise the air filtration system. But by then, I knew the contamination story was a lie. Maybe the shed was too. James helped me learn how to pick locks from videos online. It took 3 days of practicing on my bedroom door before I felt even close to ready. I knew that if my parents caught me, there would be no believable excuse. But the need to know the truth had become stronger than fear. One night, I waited until 3 in the morning when the house was completely silent. Then I slipped out of bed, crept downstairs, and stepped into the backyard. The walk across the grass felt unreal. I had never felt wet grass under my bare feet before. Dew clung to my toes. The sky above me was so huge it made me dizzy. I had seen stars through windows, but outside, they looked like they belonged to a different universe. 16 years inside, and there I was, standing under the open sky, breathing freely. The shed smelled like dust, old paint, wood, and metal. I used my phone flashlight to look around. At first, everything looked normal. Tools hanging on the wall, paint cans on shelves, boxes, yard supplies. Then I saw a filing cabinet in the back corner. Inside the cabinet were folders organized by year. I pulled one out from 12 years earlier and opened it. There were newspaper clippings inside. My flashlight landed on one headline, and my entire body froze. 4 children vanish from playground. Massive search underway. Under the headline were 4 small faces. I stared so hard the words blurred. The date was from 12 years ago. The location matched that old memory I had carried around like a secret bruise. Sunscreen, grass, children laughing. The ages of the missing children lined up perfectly with me and my siblings. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my phone. I took pictures of everything. The headline, the date, the faces. Then I forced myself to keep searching. The folders were full of documents that made my stomach twist. There were birth certificates with our current names, but the seals looked wrong, like they had been printed at home. Medical records were handwritten instead of typed on official forms. I found old photographs of 4 children at different parks and playgrounds, and one of them showed the same kids from the newspaper clipping. I knew in my bones that I was looking at us. There was also an envelope with an old address from 3 states away, with postmarks dating back 13 years. Inside were practice signatures. The same name written over and over in slightly different styles, like someone had been rehearsing how to become another person. A notebook had our fake medical condition written out repeatedly in different handwriting. Combined variable environmental immunodeficiency. The phrase that had trapped us inside for our whole lives had been practiced like a script. I felt cold despite the summer heat inside the shed. I photographed every piece of evidence I could find. Newspaper clippings, forged birth certificates, fake medical papers, maps with routes marked in red pen, articles tracking search efforts that eventually went cold. The filing cabinet showed years of documentation. It was not a moment of panic. It was not some accident or misunderstanding. Someone had planned this. Someone had stolen 4 children and built an entire life around keeping them hidden. I put everything back exactly where I found it and slipped back across the yard, the grass wet under my feet and my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The back door creaked as I slipped inside, and I froze for a full minute listening for movement upstairs. When I was sure no one had woken up, I went to my room and closed the door quietly. I could not sleep. For the next 2 hours, I made copies of everything in every way I could think of. I emailed the photos to myself using 3 different accounts I created with fake names. I hid my phone under a loose floorboard beneath my bed, a hiding place I had discovered years earlier. I wrote the most important details on paper and stuffed them inside an old book on my shelf. If my parents found one copy, I needed another to survive. By dawn, I was still lying awake, staring at the ceiling and replaying that old memory. Sunscreen, cut grass, laughter. It was not a dream. It was a stolen piece of my real life. At breakfast, I watched Mom and Dad like they were strangers, wearing familiar faces. Mom made pancakes and hummed while she cooked. Dad drank coffee and read the news on his tablet. They looked normal, parental, domestic. That was what made it so horrifying. Mom asked if I had slept well, and I lied and said yes. Dad reminded us about math lessons that afternoon. Everything sounded exactly like every other morning we had ever had, but nothing was the same anymore. After breakfast, when our parents were busy with work calls in Dad's office, I gathered my siblings in the playroom and closed the door. I showed them the photos on my phone. I watched their faces change as they understood what they were seeing. My younger brother started crying immediately. My sister went pale and grabbed the phone from my hands to zoom in on the newspaper clipping. My other sibling just stared in silence. My sister refused to believe it at first. She said there had to be some explanation. Mom and Dad would never lie about something that huge. But I walked them through every piece of evidence. The fake birth certificates, the newspaper clippings with our faces, the maps, the practice signatures, the fake medical condition. The more details I pointed out, the less she could deny it. My younger brother would not stop crying, so I sat beside him and let him lean against me while we tried to figure out what to do next. We had spent our entire lives being told the outside world was deadly. Now we knew the danger had been inside the house with us the whole time. Once everyone was calmer, I went back to my room and opened the old laptop. I messaged James, carefully, because I was afraid someone else might see it. I attached some of the photos, but I cropped out anything that showed our exact address or could identify us too easily. I asked him if the documents looked like real medical paperwork. Then I hit send and stared at the screen, refreshing over and over. Within an hour, he replied. His message was short, but it made my body relax for the first time since I had opened the filing cabinet. He said the paperwork was not real. He said it looked like forgery. He told me I needed to be careful, but I also needed help. Seeing someone outside our house confirm that I was not crazy helped me breathe a little easier. That evening, after dinner, when our parents thought we were doing homework, I took the laptop into the bathroom and locked the door. I started searching for the missing children case using the details from the newspaper clipping. I found old forum posts. I found Facebook groups that were still active after 12 years. Parents and relatives still posted on anniversaries, sharing memories and begging for any information about what had happened to the 4 children who disappeared from a playground. There were age progression photos created by forensic artists, showing what the missing kids might look like now. I stared at the girl who would have been my age. She looked almost exactly like me. Same nose, same eyes, same face shape. I found images of the others too, and the resemblance to my siblings was impossible to ignore. I took screenshots and saved them to a hidden folder. Every new piece of information felt like it was pulling me out of one life and into another, one I should have had but could barely remember. The next morning, I decided to test Mom. At breakfast, I asked specific questions about our condition, using medical terms James had taught me. I asked about T-cell counts, immunoglobulin levels, blood tests, and what our numbers had been at our last checkup. Mom's face flushed. She changed the subject quickly and said I did not need to worry about technical details because she and Dad handled all the medical stuff. I pressed a little more, asking when our last blood test had been. She got angry. She told me to stop questioning her and finish my breakfast. I apologized and acted like I was dropping it, but I watched her carefully. She could not answer a single specific question about the illness that had supposedly controlled our entire lives. Later that afternoon, Mom announced she was going to the store, and Dad shut himself in his office for a work call that was supposed to last an hour. I knew this might be my chance. I grabbed the old laptop, wrapped it in a plastic bag, and waited by the front door until I could hear Dad's voice through the office wall. Then, I unlocked the front door as quietly as I could and slipped outside. The neighbor's recycling bin was sitting at the curb for pickup. I walked over, trying to look casual even though my heart felt like it was hammering against my ribs. I lifted the lid and shoved the laptop down under cardboard and papers, hidden but hopefully safe. As I closed the lid, I saw Heidi Nolan from across the street standing on her porch watching me. Our eyes met for 1 second. I tried to put everything into my expression. Something was wrong. I needed help. Please notice. She gave the tiniest nod, almost nothing, but it felt like a lifeline. I hurried back inside before anyone realized I had left. That night, after everyone was asleep, I video called James from under my covers with the volume turned almost all the way down. He answered right away. I told him everything. The shed, the newspaper, the fake records, the old photographs, the missing children case, the age progression images, the forged birth certificates, everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he told me I needed to contact authorities as soon as it was safe. He said what was happening to us was criminal and that we might be in danger now that I knew the truth. We talked through possible scenarios. Would we be taken away immediately? Would there be an investigation first? Would my parents know I had reported them? The fear felt so big it was choking me, but the need to escape the lie was bigger. James promised to help however he could and told me to be careful and smart. The next day, I tested Dad. I deliberately left my bedroom door wide open when I knew he would walk by on his way to the kitchen. Within 2 minutes, he appeared in the hallway and stopped immediately. He closed the door, then opened it again to lecture me about contamination risks and how I was putting everyone in danger. His voice was tight in a way I had never heard before. He watched me the whole time. I apologized and promised to be more careful. I acted sorry and compliant, but inside I was studying him. He reacted too fast. His words sounded rehearsed. It was like he had been practicing what to say if one of us questioned the rules. After he left, I sat on my bed thinking about how everything they did was calculated. Every rule, every warning, every panic attack about contamination, all of it had been built to keep us afraid. That afternoon, while our parents were occupied, I gathered my siblings again in the playroom. We created a code word system so we could communicate urgently without Mom and Dad understanding. I'm really tired meant something was wrong. Did you finish your math? Meant meet in the bathroom. We started preparing small go bags with clothes and important items, hiding them in the backs of closets where our parents hopefully would not look. My sister was finally starting to accept the truth, and we all agreed that whatever happened, we had to stick together. My younger brother asked if we would ever see Mom and Dad again. I did not know what to say. So I hugged him and told him we would figure it out together. Later that evening, I remembered seeing an old phone in the kitchen junk drawer. When our parents were watching TV, I sneaked downstairs, grabbed it, took it to my room, and plugged it in. The battery was dead, but after an hour, it powered on and connected to Wi-Fi. I found the missing person's hotline number from one of the websites I had saved and opened the tip submission form. My hands shook so badly I could barely type. I entered our address, described the evidence in the shed, and attached several photos, including the newspaper clipping and the fake birth certificates. I read everything 3 times to make sure it made sense. Then I hit send before I could lose my nerve. The confirmation page said someone would review the tip within 24 hours. It gave me a case number. I wrote it down, turned off the phone, and hid it in the bathroom air vent behind the metal grate. The next morning at breakfast, Mom and Dad announced that the whole house needed a deep cleaning. They said the air filters needed maintenance, and they were going to collect all our electronic devices to make sure nothing interfered with the filtration system. My stomach dropped, but I kept my face calm. They searched our rooms one by one, taking phones, tablets, anything with a screen or battery. I was grateful I had hidden the important things because they were thorough. They checked drawers, closets, under beds. The atmosphere in the house had changed. Mom kept glancing at Dad. Dad seemed jumpy and on edge. They suspected something. That night, after everyone went to bed, I waited until after midnight, went to the bathroom, and retrieved the old phone from the vent. I turned the brightness all the way down and created another fake email account. I uploaded all the photos to cloud storage, so the evidence would survive even if the phone was found and destroyed. I also wrote down the tip line number and case number on a small piece of paper, then hid that paper inside a tear in my mattress lining. Every precaution felt necessary because our parents were getting more suspicious by the hour. I waited 3 more nights before going back to the shed. I needed to be sure everyone was sleeping deeply. At 1:30 in the morning on the 4th night, I slipped out of bed, tiptoed downstairs, avoided the creaky 3rd step from the bottom, and crossed the yard again. Inside the shed, I went straight to the filing cabinet and checked for drawers I had missed. The bottom drawer was locked. I used the bobby pin technique I had practiced, and after 5 minutes, the lock clicked open. Inside were official-looking documents with raised seals. I pulled them out with shaking hands. They were birth certificates, but not the fake ones with our current names. These had completely different names. The parents listed were not Mom and Dad. My real birth name was printed there in black ink. I stared at it for a long time because it felt like reading about a stranger. My siblings had different names too, names I had never heard before. I photographed each certificate carefully. Underneath them was an old photograph. bent at the corners. 4 small children stood in front of playground equipment, and I recognized the red slide from my earliest memory. On the back, someone had written 4 names in blue pen, along with a date from 13 years earlier. The names matched the birth certificates. These were our real names, the ones we had before we were taken. I kept searching, and found a manila envelope stuffed in the back of the drawer. Inside were apartment lease papers from a city 3 states away. The dates were from the year before we disappeared. There were utility bills with the same address and printed maps with notes scribbled in the margins. Certain playgrounds and parks were circled in red pen, with routes drawn between them. Looking at those maps made me feel sick because they showed how much planning had gone into taking us. This had not been some sudden bad decision. They had spent months figuring out where to find children and how to take them without getting caught. I photographed everything, put it back exactly how I found it, closed the drawer, and returned to the house with weak legs. Instead of going straight to bed, I woke my siblings one by one, putting my finger to my lips so they stayed quiet. We gathered in the playroom, and I showed them the photos. My younger brother cried when he saw the real birth certificates. My sister held his hand and stared at her real name on the screen, touching it like she could make it feel true. None of the names felt like ours because we had never heard them before. We were looking at our own identities like they were artifacts from someone else's life. The sun was starting to rise when we finally returned to our rooms. I hid my phone again and tried to sleep, but I was too wired. At breakfast a few hours later, Dad made an announcement that sounded casual but felt dangerous. He said we needed extra filter maintenance for the whole next week, and that everyone had to stay in their rooms except for meals. No exceptions. Mom nodded along, but she looked stressed and kept glancing at Dad like they had been discussing something serious. The sudden lockdown felt like a trap closing around us. During lunch the next day, I had maybe 10 minutes out of my room while Mom was in the bathroom and Dad was on a work call. I grabbed a piece of paper and wrote as fast as I could. I asked for a welfare check at our address. I wrote that we were being held inside against our will and needed urgent help. Then I folded it and addressed it to Heidi Nolan across the street. When I took the trash to the curb, I slipped the note through her mail slot. It was a huge risk, but we were running out of time. From my bedroom window later that afternoon, I watched Heidi's front porch. She came outside to get her mail, noticed the paper, and picked it up. She read it right there on the porch. Then she looked up at our house for what felt like forever. I stayed back so she could not clearly see me, but I think she knew I was watching. Finally, she gave one small nod and went inside. Relief hit me so hard I almost cried, but it came with terror too. There was no taking it back now. That evening, Dad came into my room without knocking. I was sitting on my bed, and I did not notice the bobby pin lockpick on my desk until he walked over and picked it up. His face went completely cold and blank. That scared me more than yelling would have. He asked, in a calm voice that made my skin crawl, what I had been doing. I tried to say I was just messing around, but he cut me off. He searched my room, taking anything that could possibly be used as a tool. He emptied drawers, checked under my mattress, searched my closet, and then told me I was grounded to my bed except for bathroom breaks. He left the door open so he could watch me from the hallway. I waited until I heard him go downstairs, then moved fast. I had maybe 2 minutes. I grabbed my real phone from the floorboard hiding spot and swapped it with an old broken phone I had kept in a drawer. The broken one looked similar enough that I hoped he would not notice. When Dad came back, he saw the decoy phone on my nightstand and took it. I acted devastated and defeated, slumping on my bed like I had given up. He seemed satisfied. The real phone stayed hidden under the floorboard. It was my only connection to the outside world and the evidence I had gathered. Late that night, I heard voices through the wall from Mom and Dad's bedroom. They were arguing. Dad said something about moving again and starting over somewhere else. Mom sounded like she was crying. Her voice was high and strained. I pressed my ear against the wall and held my breath. Dad kept saying they had no choice and needed to leave soon. Mom asked what they would tell us kids. My heart raced because I realized they were planning to run away and take us with them. They knew someone might be closing in. They were panicking. I needed the welfare check to happen before they could pack us up and disappear to another place where no one would ever find us. I barely slept. By morning, I was already awake and watching from my window. Around 9, I saw Heidi come out of her house and walk to the end of her driveway, where a man in jeans and a polo shirt was waiting with a notebook. She kept pointing toward our house while he wrote things down. He nodded a lot. Then he took out his phone and made a call. They talked for about 15 more minutes before he got in his car and drove away. Heidi looked directly at my window before going back inside. I hoped she could tell I was grateful, even though she probably could not see me clearly. I waited until Mom was in the kitchen and Dad was in his office before trying to tell my siblings. On my way to the bathroom, I knocked softly on my sister's doorframe, mouthed the word, bathroom, and held up 5 fingers. 5 minutes. She nodded. My younger brother passed in the hallway, and I gave him the same signal. He understood immediately. We had gotten good at silent communication. A few minutes later, all four of us crowded into the bathroom, the only place without a window where someone could not easily see us gathering. I stood by the door, listening for footsteps, and whispered that Heidi had talked to a man with a notebook, and I thought the welfare check was happening. My sister went pale and asked what we were supposed to say when they came. I reminded her that we had to tell the truth about everything: the shed, the filing cabinet, the newspaper clippings, the birth certificates, the fake condition, the fact that we had breathed outside air, and nothing happened. My younger brother kept asking if we were doing the right thing. His voice was shaking. I told my other sibling nodded and repeated details about the folders organized by year. We agreed to stay calm and specific. Then we left one at a time so it would not look suspicious. Back in my room, I pulled the phone from the floorboard, sat with my back to the door, and looked up the non-emergency police number. My finger hovered over the call button. Heidi had already spoken to someone, but what if it was not enough? What if it took too long? What if my parents really did try to run? I pressed call. It rang once, then twice. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway coming toward my room. I panicked, ended the call, deleted the number from my call history, and shoved the phone back under the floorboard just before Dad appeared in my doorway. He asked what I was doing. I said I was just sitting there thinking, which sounded stupid even as I said it. He stared at me for a long moment, then told me to come downstairs for breakfast. My heart was still pounding as I followed him down. The danger felt different now. They were watching us carefully, and every small move could expose us. At breakfast, nobody said much. Mom served eggs and toast, but I could barely eat. Dad watched all of us while he drank his coffee, and I could tell he was suspicious even if he did not know exactly what we had done. That afternoon, Mom and Dad called us into the living room and said they needed to do maintenance on the air circulation system. Dad went upstairs with his toolbox. We heard drilling and banging. When he came back down, he was carrying my bedroom door. Mom explained in a fake, cheerful voice that the doors needed to come off temporarily to improve airflow. Dad removed all 4 bedroom doors and stacked them in the garage. Then Mom took down the bathroom shower curtain too. She said we did not need privacy for air circulation to work properly. I understood immediately what they were really doing. They were making sure we could not have private conversations, hide anything, or move without being seen. The control became suffocating. Without doors, we were exposed all the time. Mom and Dad took turns sitting in the hallway where they could watch all of us at once. My sister tried to read, but kept glancing toward Mom's chair. My younger brother lay on his bed staring at the ceiling, trying not to cry. I sat on my bed feeling their eyes on me. When Mom finally got up to use the bathroom, I had maybe 2 minutes. I grabbed the real phone from the floor and closed the door, even though the missing shower curtain made the room feel exposed. I opened the tip line site, attached the new photos of the real birth certificates and the photograph with our real names written on the back, and typed a message saying we were at immediate risk. I included our exact address. I wrote that our parents knew something was wrong, that they were talking about moving us again, and that we needed help before it was too late. I hit send and watched the progress bar crawl across the screen. When it finally confirmed the message went through, relief and fear crashed over me at once. I deleted the browser history, cleared the gallery, flushed the toilet, washed my hands, and tried to look normal when I walked back out. Mom was already back in her chair, watching me. The rest of the day dragged by. Mom and Dad switched hallway duty every few hours. Dinner was almost silent, except for forks scraping plates. That night, after they finally went to bed, I heard soft footsteps. My sister appeared in my doorway and gestured for me to come. We met my younger brother and other sibling in the hallway, then slipped into the bathroom. I kept my ear against the door while we whispered. My sister said we needed to go over exactly what we would say one more time. We practiced describing the filing cabinet in the shed, the folders by year, the newspaper clippings, the forged documents, the real birth certificates, the photograph, and the fake medical condition. My younger brother rehearsed explaining that we had breathed outside air multiple times with no reaction. My other sibling practiced saying we had no medical equipment, no doctors, and no proof that the disorder was real. We took turns until we all knew the key points. My sister made us promise not to defend Mom and Dad or make excuses for them. They kidnapped us, she whispered. They lied to us our whole lives. We all agreed, even though my younger brother was crying quietly. Before we left, I told everyone that tomorrow might be the day everything changed, and we had to be ready. The next morning, I was awake before dawn, sitting by my window and watching the street. Normal morning life moved outside like it always had. Neighbors leaving for work, kids waiting for the school bus, cars pulling out of driveways. It felt impossible that all of it had been happening so close to us for years while we were trapped behind glass. Around 8:30, two police cars turned onto our block, followed by a dark, unmarked sedan. They drove slowly, like they were looking for an address. Heidi came out of her house and stood on her porch. When the cars got closer, she pointed directly at our front door, the vehicles parked in front of our house. 4 people got out, 2 uniformed officers, a woman in business clothes, and Heidi. My heart beat so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then, the doorbell rang. I moved to the top of the stairs where I could hear. Dad's footsteps crossed the living room, and the front door opened. I leaned just enough to see part of the entryway. Dad started talking in his fake friendly voice, explaining that we had a serious medical condition and visitors were dangerous. He used words like immune, compromised, and contamination risk. He sounded nervous and fast. A woman's voice cut through his explanation, firm and professional. She said they were there for a welfare check and needed to see all 4 children immediately. Dad's voice got louder. He said they did not understand the severity of our condition and that exposure could kill us. The woman repeated that they needed to see us and that he had to cooperate. One officer said something about obstruction. Dad tried to physically block the doorway. Then Mom came from the kitchen asking what was going on, her voice high and panicked. My sister appeared beside me at the top of the stairs and grabbed my hand. My younger brother and other sibling were right behind her. We looked at one another, and I knew this was the moment. If we did not act, Dad might convince them to leave. I ran down the stairs. My bare feet slapped against the wood, and my siblings followed. I pushed past Dad toward the doorway. He tried to grab my arm, but I pulled away, and one of the officers immediately stepped between us. I looked at the woman and the officers, and the words came out fast and desperate. I told them we needed help. I told them everything our parents had said about us being sick was a lie. I told them we were not ill, and that they had kept us locked inside our entire lives. Dad started yelling. Mom cried that I did not know what I was talking about. My sister stepped forward and said it was true. She said we had found evidence in the shed proving we were kidnapped. My younger brother was crying, but he nodded and said, we were the missing children from 12 years ago. The woman, whose name I later learned was Maggie Bishop, held up her hand and told everyone to stop. She looked directly at me with a serious but kind expression and said she needed to speak with each of us separately. She said our parents had to cooperate immediately. The officers made it clear that Mom and Dad needed to step back. I could see the moment Dad realized he had lost control. His face shifted from angry to scared. Mom kept crying and reaching toward us, but the officers kept them away. Maggie insisted that we go outside so she could talk to us away from our parents. The officers escorted us through the front door and onto the lawn. I stepped into real outside air, surrounded by strangers for the first time I could remember. It was so bright after living inside that I had to squint. Birds, cars, voices, wind, everything hit me at once. The world was louder and bigger than it had ever seemed through glass. My siblings clustered around me. Neighbors began coming out of their houses to watch. Heidi stood near the police cars, and when I looked at her, she gave me a small, encouraging nod. She had believed me. Maggie asked questions in a calm voice, while the officers kept our parents inside. I could see Mom and Dad through the front window watching us, with desperate expressions. The grass was cool under my bare feet. The air smelled like flowers, car exhaust, damp earth, and freedom. I was terrified, but I knew we had done the right thing. Maggie asked my name, my age, how long we had lived in the house, and what our parents had told us. I answered as clearly as I could, even though my voice shook. She asked about the evidence in the shed, and I told her about the filing cabinet, the newspaper clippings, the forged documents, the birth certificates, and the old photograph. My sister confirmed everything. She explained that we had tested outside air and had no reaction. My younger brother nodded when Maggie asked if that was true. My other sibling quietly said yes. Maggie asked whether our parents had ever physically hurt us, and I told her about Mom grabbing my arms when I was 7 and locking me in my room. My siblings mentioned times we had been locked away, watched, searched, and punished. When Maggie asked whether we wanted to talk to our parents, all 4 of us said no at the same time. One officer walked to his patrol car and spoke into his radio with urgent hand gestures. Within minutes, sirens approached. 3 more police cars pulled up with lights flashing. Neighbors gathered on porches and lawns, whispering and pointing. Officers started stringing yellow tape across our driveway. Then I saw Dad being walked toward a patrol car with handcuffs around his wrists. Mom saw it and made a horrible wailing sound. Her knees buckled, and an officer caught her before she hit the ground completely. A female officer helped her sit on the grass. Watching it all made me feel dizzy, like I was floating above my body. My sister grabbed my hand and squeezed, and I squeezed back because I needed something solid. Maggie told us medical staff were coming to check us and that we were safe now. She said nobody was going to make us go back inside that house. An ambulance arrived about 10 minutes later. 2 EMTs got out with equipment bags and introduced themselves, but everything felt too loud and bright for me to catch their names. They were gentle. They kept saying they only wanted to make sure we were healthy. They checked our vital signs on the lawn, taking blood pressure, listening to our hearts, looking in our ears, and asking if we had trouble breathing or skin reactions. We all said no. They wrapped blankets around our shoulders even though it was warm outside, and only then did I realize I was shaking. The EMTs spoke with Maggie and the officers, then told us we needed to go to the hospital for a full checkup. I watched Dad being placed in the back of one patrol car, and Mom in another, still crying. My younger brother started crying too when he saw them taken away. My sister put her arm around him. We climbed into the ambulance together. Through the small window, I saw Heidi standing on her lawn. She gave me a small wave, and my throat tightened. At the hospital, nurses met us at the emergency entrance and led us through automatic doors into a bright hallway that smelled like cleaning products. They took us to a private room with 4 beds separated by curtains. A doctor came in wearing blue scrubs and introduced himself as Dr. Dexter Raymond. He shook each of our hands, which surprised me because adults usually did not treat us like that. He explained that he needed to run tests to check our overall health and see whether we had any medical issues. He took blood from each of us and talked us through every step. He listened to our hearts and lungs, checked reflexes, examined our skin, eyes, and throats, and asked questions about diet, sleep, sickness, and our daily life. Nurses came in and out, bringing supplies and writing things down. The whole process took a long time. By the time the initial exam was finished, my arm was sore from the blood draw, and I was exhausted. Dr. Raymond told us he would have preliminary results in a few hours and said we should rest. Nurses brought us sandwiches and juice boxes. We sat on the hospital beds with our legs dangling over the edges, eating quietly like we were afraid the food might disappear. That afternoon, a man in a suit knocked on the door and introduced himself as Detective Vikram Mahmood. He had kind eyes and a calm voice. He pulled up a chair and sat at our level instead of standing over us. He explained that he needed to ask questions about our lives and what we had found in the shed. He started with me because I had discovered the evidence. He asked detailed questions about the filing cabinet, the folders, and the documents. I told him about the newspaper clippings, fake birth certificates, old photographs, practice signatures, and the real birth certificates. He asked whether I had taken pictures. I showed him my phone and scrolled through the photos. He asked permission to send them to his email, and I agreed. Then he asked about our routines, what our parents told us about illness, how they controlled our movements, and whether we had ever been allowed outside. My siblings took turns answering, each adding details the others forgot. I told him about the memory of sunscreen and grass. He wrote quickly in a notebook. When he finished the first round of questions, I asked what happened next. He said they were getting a search warrant for the house and shed and would collect the evidence I described. He told us we had done the right thing. He said we were brave. Those words made me feel less guilty, even though part of me still felt like I had destroyed the only family I had ever known. I gave Detective Mahmood exact details about where the filing cabinet was and which drawer held the real birth certificates. I also told him about the old laptop I had hidden in Heidi's recycling bin. He made a note to retrieve it. Later, Doctor. Raymond returned with papers in his hand and a small smile on his face. He told us our test results were normal. We had healthy immune systems. No signs of an immune disorder. Our blood work looked good. We were well nourished. Our development was appropriate for our ages. There was no medical reason we had ever needed to be isolated. Hearing it from a real doctor broke something open inside me, and I started crying even though I tried not to. My siblings cried too. Doctor. Raymond handed us tissues and said it was okay to feel relieved. That evening, Maggie came back to talk about where we would stay that night. She took us to a conference room down the hall. Through the large window, we could see our house in the distance, surrounded by police cars with lights flashing. Officers moved in and out of the front door and the shed, carrying boxes and evidence bags. Someone was taking photographs, the flash visible even from where we sat. We watched as they brought out the filing cabinet on a dolly, followed by more boxes stacked on top. An officer carried out fake medical materials that had apparently been used to support the lie. Strangers were dismantling the place where we had lived our entire lives, and even though I knew it had to happen, it felt wrong. The house looked smaller from a distance, less like a prison, more like a regular building that had held too many lies. A technician in a white coat came into the conference room with a case of supplies. She said she needed to collect DNA samples from each of us using cotton swabs inside our cheeks. The samples would be compared to the old missing children case and run through databases to find biological relatives. The swabbing only took seconds and did not hurt, but knowing what it meant made my hands shake. We might finally learn who we really were, what our names had been, who our real families were, where we came from. After the technician left, Maggie explained that we were being placed in emergency protective custody while the investigation continued. We could not go back to our house or contact our parents. She promised we would stay together as siblings and that she would be our primary caseworker. My younger brother cried again and asked where we would sleep. Maggie said she had found a foster home with room for all four of us, with a woman experienced in emergency placements. Her name was Mrs. Smithson, and Maggie said her house was safe and comfortable. The idea of sleeping in a stranger's house that night made everything feel too real and too fast. We gathered the few things the hospital had given us, mostly the clothes we were wearing and the blankets from the ambulance, and followed Maggie to her car. The drive across town took about 20 minutes. I watched neighborhoods pass through the window like I was seeing a movie of a place everyone else knew how to live in. Mrs. Smithson's house was small, with a neat lawn and flowers in the front garden. She came out onto the porch as we arrived. She was older, with gray hair and a soft face, and she waved gently. Inside, she showed us 2 bedrooms with 2 beds each. The house smelled like cooking, laundry detergent, and something warm and ordinary. Everything was unfamiliar, even though it was nicer than what we were used to. Mrs. Smithson made hot chocolate and put cookies on the kitchen table. We sat on her couch, huddled close together because we did not know what else to do. My younger brother would not let go of my sister's hand. My other sibling pressed against my side. We were free. We were safe. We were out of that house, but it did not feel like victory. It felt like floating in space after everything you knew had been torn away, even if everything you knew had been built on lies. Mrs. Smithson talked quietly about house rules and routines, but I could barely hear her over the rushing in my ears. Eventually, she stopped and showed us to the bedrooms. My sister and younger brother took one room. My other sibling stayed with me in the second. We did not unpack because we barely had anything to unpack. Dinner was quiet and awful, even though the food was good. Mrs. Smithson made spaghetti, garlic bread, and salad, normal food in a normal kitchen, but none of us could eat much. My younger brother pushed food around his plate. My sister cried silently, tears sliding down her face while she stared at the table. My other sibling managed a few bites, then asked to be excused. I forced myself to eat because I knew we needed strength, but everything tasted like nothing. After dinner, Mrs. Smithson suggested we rest, and we went upstairs without argument. My sibling and I lay in separate beds in the dark, both wide awake. Around midnight, they whispered across the room and asked whether I thought Mom and Dad were scared in jail. I did not know how to answer. I said, I don't know. After a while, my sibling whispered that they felt guilty for not fighting harder to stay with them, even though they knew what happened was wrong. I understood completely. Part of me still wanted to defend them too, even after everything. In the other room, I could hear my younger brother crying and my sister trying to comfort him. The next morning, Mrs. Smithson made pancakes. We sat at her kitchen table trying to act normal. Through the window, I saw a white van pull up outside with a satellite dish on top. Then another van parked behind it, then a third. My stomach dropped. Mrs. Smithson noticed me staring and went to look. Her face tightened. She called Maggie immediately. Within 20 minutes, Maggie arrived, looking stressed and tired. She explained that somehow the media had found out where we were staying. They had connected our case to the old missing children investigation, and the story was becoming huge. She was arranging privacy protections and possibly moving us somewhere else. The idea of moving again, after only one night, made my younger brother cry. Maggie made calls and had police move the news vans back, but we could still see them down the street. She told us not to go outside or near windows. The whole thing made me feel exposed in a new way. Strangers everywhere were talking about what had happened to us, and we had no control over the story. I went upstairs and pulled out the old phone I still had hidden in my pocket. I logged into the support group and saw a message from James. He said he had seen news coverage about 4 kids found after being held captive for years and recognized some details. He asked carefully if it was us, without pushing. He said he was thinking of me and that he was proud I had been brave enough to find the truth. He said he was there if I needed to talk. Reading his words made me cry for the first time since everything happened because his friendship felt like the only stable thing left in my life. I wrote back and said yes, it was us, and everything was overwhelming. He replied almost immediately, telling me to focus on taking care of myself and my siblings. 2 days later, Detective Mahmoud came to the foster home. Maggie was there too, and we all sat in Mrs. Smithson's living room while he opened a folder. He explained that the preliminary DNA results were back. The people we had called Mom and Dad were not our biological parents. Evidence from the shed had been matched to the missing children case. everything lined up. Our real families had been notified that we had been found alive after 12 years. Hearing it officially made it feel final, even though I already knew. My sister cried again. My younger brother sat blank and empty. Detective Mahmoud was gentle but direct. He said more testing and evidence processing still had to happen, but the case was strong. Criminal charges were being filed, and there would be court proceedings we might need to participate in. While he talked, I felt underwater again, like the words were reaching me from far away. 3 days later, we attended a preliminary protective hearing at the courthouse. Maggie drove us early, and we entered through a back door to avoid reporters. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. There was a judge behind a big desk, lawyers at tables, and rows of seats that felt too formal for something so personal. We sat together with Maggie beside us. The judge explained that our captors would appear by video link from jail. When the screen lit up, I saw Mom and Dad wearing orange jumpsuits. My whole body went cold. Mom looked smaller, her face puffy from crying. Dad looked angry and would not look at the camera. The judge asked questions. Lawyers talked about custody, evidence, protection orders, and safety. My sister cried silently through most of it, and my younger brother held her hand so tightly his knuckles turned white. The judge ordered that we remain in protective custody and that Mom and Dad were not allowed to contact us. Their lawyers tried to say they were loving parents who had made mistakes, but the prosecutor described the evidence of kidnapping, false imprisonment, and premeditation. When the hearing ended and the screen went dark, I realized I did not know if I would ever see them in person again. After the hearing, Maggie took us to her office and gave us copies of the original missing persons reports from 12 years earlier. She spread the papers across her desk. I read about myself as a 4-year-old child who vanished from a playground. I learned my real birth name again, the one printed on the certificate in the shed. I read about my biological parents, who had filed the report and never stopped searching. There were details about the life I was supposed to have. The preschool I attended, the neighborhood where we lived, the ordinary childhood that had been taken away. My siblings read their reports too, and the room went quiet. The grief of all that lost time felt enormous. 12 years of birthdays, school days, family dinners, holidays, scraped knees, friendships, and ordinary memories were gone. Maggie explained that she was setting up counseling for all of us with someone who specialized in trauma and kidnapping cases. The next week, we started sessions with Nadine Bauer. Her office had comfortable chairs, soft lighting, and shelves full of books and small, calming objects. She was probably in her 40s, with kind eyes and a voice that never rushed. In our first session, she told us everything we were feeling was normal and valid, including the confusing emotions we had toward the people who took us. She asked us to talk about the last few weeks, but I could barely form words without crying. My siblings broke down too. We tried to explain betrayal, relief, grief, fear, anger, and guilt all tangled together. Nadine did not rush us or try to fix it with empty comfort. She listened. She helped us name the emotions. She told us healing would not be quick or linear, and that each of us would process it differently. By the end of the session, I was exhausted, but I felt slightly less alone. A few days later, Detective Mahmoud came back with more news. Biological relatives had been located and wanted to meet us. For me, it was an aunt and uncle named Brian and Rosanna Cartwright, my mother's sister and brother-in-law. He said they had been part of the search efforts for all 12 years and had never given up hope. He showed me photos of them and asked if I would be open to meeting them. The idea filled me with hope and terror at the same time. That night, my siblings and I talked for a long time about whether we were ready to meet our biological families. My sister wanted to wait. She said it was too much, too fast, and that we were barely holding ourselves together. I said I thought maybe we should meet them once, just to see how it felt, because they had been searching for us for so long. My younger brother did not know what he wanted. My other siblings said they were scared but willing. After more than an hour, we agreed to a supervised meeting with Nadine present, and with the rule that we could stop any time if it became too overwhelming. Maggie also arranged for us to visit the old house under supervision so we could collect personal belongings. Going back felt surreal and wrong. Police officers escorted us inside, and we were only allowed in certain rooms. Walking through those familiar spaces felt like entering a museum of our captivity. Everything looked the same, but now every object had a different meaning. I went to my bedroom and gathered my favorite books and the few items that actually felt like mine. My siblings did the same, moving quietly through their rooms like ghosts. In the hallway, I avoided looking at family photos on the walls, pictures of all 6 of us smiling at different ages. In the living room, there was a photo from last Christmas. We all looked happy, normal, real. I had to turn away because the smiles hurt too much. We loaded our things into bags and left as quickly as we could. Being there made me feel sick, sad, and angry all at once. Over the next few days, Heidi went to the police station and gave her official statement. Detective Mahmoud later told us she described how she had never once seen us outside in 12 years. She told them about the strange filtration system visible through windows and how Mom panicked if anyone came too close to the door. She mentioned a delivery driver who tried to hand Dad a package directly, and how Mom came running out screaming about contamination. Heidi said she had always felt something was wrong, but she had not known what to do until I slipped that note through her mail slot. Her testimony helped establish the pattern of control and isolation, making the case stronger. I wanted to thank her, but Maggie said it was not appropriate yet because Heidi might have to testify in court. Still, I felt grateful she had trusted her instincts when it mattered. One evening, Mrs. Smithson sat down with us and pulled out school enrollment papers. Fall semester started in 3 weeks, and we needed to register if we wanted to attend. The idea of sitting in a classroom with other teenagers made my stomach flip between excitement and terror. She helped each of us fill out forms, and I marked that I would start 11th grade. Mom's homeschooling had apparently kept me academically caught up according to placement tests, but socially, I felt years behind. I had never had an in-person friend my own age. I had never used a locker, eaten in a cafeteria, changed classrooms, joined a club, or figured out where to sit at lunch. Mrs. Smithson saw the panic on my face and told me lots of kids were nervous starting a new school. I did not correct her. This was different. I had never been to any school at all. Nadine scheduled an extra session to help me prepare a statement for the next court hearing. She explained that the judge wanted to hear directly from us about how the isolation affected us and what we needed moving forward. We sat in her office with a notepad, and she asked questions while I tried to put words around things that felt too large. Writing it down made me realize how much normal childhood we had missed. Birthday parties, sleepovers, learning to ride bikes, going to movies, having friends, playing sports, walking to the store, sitting in classrooms, making choices. All the tiny daily experiences that form a life had been taken from us. I got angry while writing it. Really angry in a way I had not let myself feel before. But then I had to write about the confusing part too, that I still had feelings for the people who took us. Nadine said that was normal. She said love and betrayal could exist at the same time. She helped me write a statement that was honest about the damage they caused and the complicated emotions I could not simply switch off. The next protective hearing happened 2 weeks later. We went back to the courthouse, and the judge read our statements. Then he asked each of us directly whether we wanted any supervised contact with our captors. My siblings and I had discussed it the night before, and we all said no. Their attorney tried to paint them as loving parents who had made mistakes out of fear and mental illness. They showed photos of us at different ages, looking happy and healthy. They argued that we had been fed, educated, and cared for. But the prosecutor presented the forged documents, the planning materials, the fake identities, the isolation, the locked rooms, and the stolen childhoods. The judge extended our custody arrangement with Mrs. Smithson. When he denied supervised visits, I felt both relief and guilt. Part of me wanted to see them and ask why. But the bigger part knew I was not ready, and maybe never would be. Maggie met with us afterward and explained that the district attorney had filed formal kidnapping charges, along with multiple counts of false imprisonment and child endangerment. She told us the case could take months or years to resolve. There would be more hearings and possibly a trial. Justice moved slowly, but it was moving. 6 weeks passed, and our placement with Mrs. Smithson shifted from temporary to longer term. She officially agreed to keep all 4 of us as long as we needed, and that removed some of the uncertainty. We started settling into routines that felt almost normal. Regular bedtimes where we actually chose when to sleep. Family dinners where we helped cook and set the table. Chores like washing dishes, taking out trash, folding laundry, and sweeping floors. Small, everyday things that other kids probably took for granted felt miraculous to us. I could choose my own clothes each morning from donations people had sent. I could open windows. I could sit in the backyard. I could walk around the block. I could feel sun on my face without being told it would kill me. My younger brother started smiling more. My sister stopped defending our captors as often. Healing did not happen all at once. It came in tiny increments. So small you almost missed them unless you were looking. Then my first day at public high school arrived. I barely slept the night before. Mrs. Smithson drove me early and walked me to the main office, where a guidance counselor was waiting. She gave me a map, a class schedule, and a calm smile. She walked me to my first period classroom. I found my locker and somehow figured out the combination. I sat through English, history, and math without having a panic attack, though my hands shook the entire time. At lunch, I stood in the cafeteria holding my tray, completely lost. I had no idea where to sit or what the rules were. I chose an empty spot at the end of a table and ate quickly with my head down. A girl with red hair asked if I was new. I managed to say yes and tell her my name. She welcomed me and asked where I had transferred from. I said, "It's complicated." She did not push. The conversation lasted maybe 2 minutes, but to me, it felt like a huge accomplishment. By the end of the day, I was completely exhausted and also amazed. I had sat in a real classroom with other kids. I had survived a cafeteria. I had made it through a day that once would have been impossible. That evening, I video chatted with James and told him about school, the cafeteria, and not knowing where to sit. He laughed kindly and said his first day at school had been a disaster too. He told me he had once sat at the wrong table and some seniors told him to move. He shared stories about getting lost, walking into the wrong classroom, and forgetting his gym clothes. For a few minutes, I felt like a regular teenager talking to a friend about regular teenage problems. James had a way of making everything less terrifying by reminding me that everyone struggles sometimes. He helped me see how far I had come in just a few months, from being locked inside a house to walking through a school hallway with other kids. Nadine arranged for us to visit a public park under her supervision the following weekend. She drove us there and said we could explore for an hour, while she stayed on a bench nearby. The sensory experience hit me immediately. Cut grass, flowers, wind, Sunday, children laughing on playground equipment. The smells and sounds unlocked that old memory so sharply I had to stop walking. I moved toward the playground and watched kids climbing and calling to each other. My younger brother ran to the swings and started pumping his legs. I stood there and cried, not exactly from sadness. It felt more like release, like something I had been holding inside for years had finally found its way out. Nadine came over and asked if I was okay. I nodded and said, "I remembered this. I remembered being little, free, and happy before everything was stolen." Nadine told me the memory was real and precious, and now I could hold on to it. In my next private counseling session, Nadine suggested I write a letter to the woman I had called Mom. I did not have to send it. It was only for me. I stared at the blank paper for a long time before I began. I wrote that part of me still loved her despite the terrible things she had done. I wrote that I was angry about that love because it felt like one more way she had damaged me. I wrote about missing her sometimes, even though I knew she was responsible for kidnapping us, lying to us, and stealing our childhoods. I wrote about the good memories mixed with the bad ones. Bedtime stories, favorite foods, fake birthdays, pancakes, gentle moments that had felt real while they were happening. I filled 3 pages before I stopped. My hand hurt. Nadine read it and said my feelings did not have to make sense yet. She told me healing was not a straight line, and I could be angry, sad, grateful, hurt, relieved, and confused all at once. She said learning to hold multiple truths at the same time was part of growth. A few days later, Mrs. Smithson asked what we wanted for dinner. The question stopped me cold because nobody had ever really asked us that before. My younger brother suggested tacos, and she smiled and said we could make them together. We stood in her kitchen choosing toppings from the store: sour cream, salsa, lettuce, tomatoes, and about 6 kinds of cheese. Mrs. Smithson showed us how to cook the meat and warm the shells. We set everything out in bowls. My sister grabbed a shell and piled so many toppings into it that it split apart and collapsed onto her plate. My younger brother laughed, really laughed. It was the first real laugh I had heard from him in weeks. We all made our tacos too full and watched them fall apart, and somehow that made it better. It felt normal and silly and good. My sister looked at me while we ate and said it felt good, even though everything was still complicated. Mrs. Smithson did not ask questions or push for some emotional moment. She just let us have it. One ordinary dinner, one choice, one mess, one small piece of freedom. 3 months after the welfare check, I stood in the backyard at night and looked up at the stars. The court case was still ahead of us. Our biological families were still waiting to meet us when we were ready. I had years of catching up to do on school, friendships, memories, trust, and life itself. But I was outside. I was breathing real air without filters, locks, or lies. I was making choices, even tiny ones, about what to eat, what to wear, when to open a window, and when to step into the sun. I was slowly learning who I actually was underneath the fake name, fake illness, fake history, and locked doors. The fear was still there, sitting in my chest. It did not disappear just because the truth came out. But something else was there too. Something quieter, something fragile, cautious hope. Maybe not that everything would be easy. Maybe not that all the stolen years could be fixed. But maybe, after everything, we would still find a way to be okay.